Mark chapter 4, verse 35 through chapter 5, verse 43. 3 sessions ago, Mark told us 4 stories: the calling of Levi, 1 incident about fasting, and 2 incidents regarding doing work on the Sabbath. We learned how Jesus Christ is a sovereign and loving Lord. 2 sessions ago, Mark told us about 5 different groups of people and the varying ways they responded to Jesus: the crowds, the 12, the family of Jesus, the religious leaders, and the spiritual family of God. Last session, Mark told us about 5 of Jesus' parables, highlighted by the parable of the soils. We learned that our receptivity to Christ is the key to receiving revelation from God and understanding His truth. Today, Mark will tell us about 4 of Jesus' miracles. Of course, he's already told us about Jesus' many miraculous healings and casting out of demons, but now he seems to be getting to the meat of the first half of his gospel. The power and authority of Jesus is a growing theme, if not the major theme, of the first half of Mark. That is why Mark moves urgently from one major event to another. You'll notice that even though Mark is the shortest of the Gospels, his miracle stories, such as these, are among the most detailed in the Gospels. As we look at miracles, let's be clear on how to approach them in the Bible. If we believe that God created, controls, and sustains all things, then it follows that He can do anything at any time. Then miracles, though rare, are rational. We can be confident in taking them at face value. They are not myths, allegories, hallucinations, exaggerations, or amazing coincidences. Our belief is that Mark's gospel is at least in part the Apostle Peter's first-hand account of events witnessed by him. Nowhere is this more evident than in the first miracle in our passage today, the calming of the storm. The story goes as follows. Jesus and his disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee when a dangerous storm arose. We know that the hills surrounding the lake funnel high winds, creating waves at times 8 to 10 feet tall. Jesus was asleep at the time, but the men were terrified. And mind you, these are experienced fishermen who knew these waters like the back of their hand. In panic, they awaken Jesus, who promptly makes the storm go away by his command. Thereafter, he reprimands the men for being afraid and having no faith. This story has all the earmarks of an eyewitness account. It is chock full of vivid details that are not found in the Matthew or Luke versions of the same event. Mark describes the time of day and that the men took Jesus just as he was. He points out the presence of other boats, Jesus sleeping on a cushion in the stern of the boat, and the disciples' possible sarcasm when they say, "Don't you care if we drown?" Undoubtedly, Peter was there, and the experience etched an indelible memory in his mind. The second story, like the previous one, also sounds like a first-hand account. Mark gives us many more interesting details than does Matthew. In this story, we head into Gentile territory. One of the things to notice is that Jesus' ministry, even early on, extended beyond Jewish regions on many occasions. We will see examples of this in the cities of Tyre and Sidon, and in the feeding of the 4,000, which may have occurred in the area of the Decapolis. In this instance, Jesus and his disciples cross over the Sea of Galilee and go to the east side. Although the text identifies it as the region of the Gerasenes, the exact geographical location is uncertain, but they are clearly along the eastern shore of the lake in an area where pigs are raised and where there are tombs and a nearby town. There they encounter a crazed, uncontrollable man possessed by an impure spirit or demon. What a strange man this is. He has superhuman strength, screams out from the tombs where he lives, and inflicts himself with injury. Luke tells us that he is naked, and Matthew tells us that there are 2 such men. Surely this strange and violent behavior is due to the demon within, and there are apparently multiple demons. Before going further, let's talk for a moment about demons. What do we know about them? We've already seen them earlier in the book of Mark. They are thought to be fallen angels who join the kingdom of Satan in rebellion against God. Unlike God, Satan is not omnipresent, so demons serve as his agents throughout the world. They really exist, and they are working today. We don't tend to talk about demons much, or at least use the term. In fact, people today say devil, and they have in mind a bizarre, completely mistaken image. It may be that one of their tactics is to get people not to recognize they actually exist. C.S. Lewis, in his book The Screwtape Letters, creates the fictitious demon named Wormwood, and he is told by his devil superior, "Our policy is to conceal ourselves. I do not think it will be difficult in keeping the person in the dark. The fact that devils are predominantly comic figures in the modern imagination will help you. If any faint suspicion of your existence begins to arise in his mind, suggest to him a picture of something in red tights." I think the Apostle Paul has a better description of demons. They are deceiving spirits. Demons can oppress and influence people and cause psychiatric and physical illness, although the Gospels distinguish between demonic influence and physical sickness. Demons are ultimately doomed, as is Satan. As far as we know, demons do not die, and so it is uncertain as to why they ask to be sent into a herd of pigs. We know that they fear being sent to a place called the abyss, which is mentioned in Luke's account of this story. This is where evil spirits suffer prior to being cast ultimately into the eternal lake of fire. One has to think that this man epitomizes a person who is trapped, isolated, not in control, abusive of his body and environment, without hope. Today, drug addiction and mental illness are obvious correlates, but is this not the universal plight of humankind without God? Jesus encounters this wretched man and commands the impure spirit to leave. What happens next is a negotiation. The spirit does everything it can to stall and avoid consequence. The spirit tries to separate itself from Jesus. "What do you want with me?" it says. The NASB says it better. "What business do we have with each other?" The spirit names Jesus as if knowledge of who he is somehow gives it power over Christ. The spirit invokes the name of God. It's possible that it had previously heard people say, "in the name of God," when attempts were made to expel evil spirits. It is indeed ridiculous that it should expect any help from God. The spirit pleads for mercy. "Do not torture me" implies that Jesus can send the demon out of the person, destroy its freedom, and send it to a place where it will be under constant torment. How many times have you heard irreligious people blurt out, "Jesus," when they are frustrated or angry or startled, or say things like, "I swear to God," to dramatize a point? Invoking the name of God for self-serving reasons is quite literally what evil spirits do when confronted with the presence of God. Jesus turns the table on the demon and asks its name. And like a soldier captured behind enemy lines, it gives only a number, not name. Legion. Apparently there are many. Some have said that legion refers to the number of soldiers in a Roman military unit, which is around 6,000. But more likely this term simply means a lot. C.S. Lewis once described the numerous demons in his life before he found Christ. A zoo of lusts, a bedlam of ambitions, a nursery of fears, a harem of fondled hatreds. My name was Legion. The demons suggest a compromise, but it turns out not to be. Once Jesus allows them to enter a herd of pigs grazing nearby, they promptly dash into the lake and drown. There are a lot of things here that are unexplained. Did Jesus know that would happen? Did he direct this to happen? Pigs can swim, so how come they all died? Seems unlikely that the demons expected the demise of the pigs. They had controlled the man for years. Surely they thought they could control pigs. I think we can assume that when their hosts perished, they went on to the place of torment, just as they had feared. This was probably an economic disaster for the pig herders and secondarily for the local townsfolk. The size of the herd was 2,000. Jesus deemed one man's life more important than any number of swine. The people of the region found out what happened, and their reaction is telling. Here is a man who was demon-possessed, his life utterly ruined, now utterly cured. Where's the amazement? Where's the joy? The people, out of fear or anger, or most likely both, want Jesus to leave. They would just as soon have their pigs and their status quo. Here's another group of people who are outsiders who see but do not see, hear what happens but do not hear. Today, even among Christians, we have a bit of the pig herder in us. One scholar said, people can tolerate religion as long as it does not affect business profits. Even people who consider themselves good Christian folk can put making money before ethical practice in areas such as tax deductions, truth in advertising, cutting corners in business, honesty in the workplace. The third and fourth miracles we'll study today are blended together by Mark. They involve two main people, a synagogue leader named Jairus and a sick woman who is unnamed. As before, Mark gives us many more details than Matthew covering the same events. Though the two miracles are intertwined, we'll take them one at a time. Jesus is presumably back in Capernaum when he encounters Jairus. He is a leader of the synagogue, which could well be the one whose ancient ruins we still see today at Capernaum in Israel. Given his position, Jairus would have had a high social standing in the community, be relatively well off financially, and function administratively for the synagogue. But he is not here for synagogue-related business. He is here because his 12-year-old daughter is deathly ill. Somehow he must have heard of Jesus' ability to heal, and he comes to plead for her life. Jesus takes some time to go to the daughter for reasons we'll see in a moment. Now, we know that Jesus can heal at a distance without ever meeting the ill person. But before he attends to the child, she succumbs and dies. You can imagine what little faith Jairus had is now dashed to the ground. While people are telling Jairus not to bother Christ any longer, it's too late, Jesus tells him not to be afraid and to continue to believe. We don't know how Jairus responded, but I suspect he did what Jesus said. Against all odds, he continued to believe. Consequently, Jesus went to the home and raised the little girl from the dead. We know that Peter witnessed this spectacular miracle, since Mark says so. Shortly after Jairus makes his initial plea and Jesus starts to go with him, a sick woman comes to Jesus. Maybe we should describe this as sneaks up on Jesus. She has had for years a bleeding disorder, presumably a menstrual problem. Not only would this make her physically weak with chronic anemia, but socially ostracized as ritually unclean. Furthermore, she is destitute, having spent all her money on physicians who have not healed her. She is afraid to be so bold as to come face to face with Jesus. After all, she is unclean, so she aims to touch his clothing unnoticed. Somehow, she has a notion that this will heal her. And in fact, it does. The woman is discovered for her secretive action, but Jesus' response to her is warm and welcoming. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. These then are our four miracles. They seem very different from each other, but they answer the same two questions. What do we learn about Jesus? And what do we learn about faith? What do we learn about Jesus? He is sovereign. We now know that Jesus' power is even greater than we knew before. His authority extends over nature itself, and his power can conquer even death. Students of the Old Testament would have known that if Christ was God, Controlling the forces of nature would be part of his divine character. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. The miracle that happened on the Sea of Galilee tells us more than Jesus can still the inner storms of our lives. The healings are meant to tell us more than Jesus can free us of our demons. They tell us more than what he will do for us. They tell us who he is. He is sovereign, almighty God. He is sensitive. Jesus' awareness of and sensitivity to the approach of people seeking him is even keener than we knew before. Amid the pressing crowd, he singles out the woman who touched his clothing, and as she reveals herself in fear and trembling, he calls her daughter. Not only does he heal her, but he encourages her faith and brings her peace. This is probably more than she even hoped for. Jesus encourages Jairus to choose faith over fear, hope over despair. Even beyond this episode with his daughter, he will need to learn the lifelong lesson of trusting in the power and love of Christ. And we can't leave the story of the Gerasene man without appreciating all that Jesus did for him. Not only did he free the man of the demons of his past, he restored his physical, mental, and emotional health. The man had probably yearned for the warmth of family, for a sense of place and identity, and for a sense of purpose. Jesus did not have him join the disciples. He sent him to his own people to share his faith and the wonder of a new life. He went home. And Jesus is in sync. We may wonder why he was not in more of a hurry to get to Jairus' house, but consider these reasons. If the young girl was already dead, then the immediate need was the woman suffering from the bleeding disorder. And that the girl was dead for a period of time, long enough for a crowded formal funeral to begin, made the ultimate miracle all the more striking. Later, Jesus would raise his friend Lazarus from the dead in the same unhurried fashion. But beyond these considerations, note that Jesus was hardly ever in a hurry to do anything. He always seemed to have a sense of God's timing in his life. We've already noticed how Jesus makes the effort to keep his exploits under wraps, so to speak, to prevent the broadcasting of his miracles to a Jewish nation longing for a leader and miracle worker. Such adulation and notoriety are misplaced and counterproductive. Jesus' mission is all about right focus and timing. It was not distraction or absent-mindedness that delayed his visit to Jairus' daughter. With Jesus, things happen when they're supposed to. Mark wants us to know that Jesus is at all times in sync with God the Father. What do we learn about faith? In the story of the storm, no one on the boat had faith except Jesus. Even though Jesus told them they should have faith, they did not. But they did have two things going for them. They remained close to Jesus, and in their desperation, they called out to him. Perhaps there's a lesson here. In difficult times, stay near to God and keep open the lines of communication. Even when your faith is lacking, call on him. How can faith be strengthened? By looking at the faithful one, the powerful Christ. Seeing God for who he is increases faith. When faith is weak, look to the Lord and not to self. While the frightened disciples had no faith, the Gerasene man had some. His demons were probably urging him to avoid Jesus at all cost. They did not want to come face to face with the one who could send them to the abyss. It must have taken the man every ounce of strength to fight against their control and run to Jesus. Had he not done so, he might not have been healed. The woman with the bleeding disorder was full of fear, both before and after her healing. But she took what little faith she had and strained to touch Jesus. Had she not done so, she might not have been healed either. They, along with Jairus, had a beginning faith, just enough to override their despairing circumstances and get them to go to Jesus. Matthew and Luke call this faith small as a mustard seed. That amount of faith can be enough if it gets us to go to Jesus. He can take it from there. You see, the miraculous works of God are not accomplished by that which is within us. They are accomplished by that which is within God.